Now, as I'm sure you know, we're going to have an incredible panel of some of Dave's closest friends over the years up here. But I also want to let you know what we have for a little bit later in the evening. After these guys have been pretty much talked out and said everything they want to say, I thought it would be nice to open up the mic for anyone else who might want to come up and say a few short words about Dave. So if you want to do that, I'm just telling you now so you can sort of prepare what you might want to say. And then also we're having an auction of 3 prints that were donated by Dave's family. They're on the table in the back. All 3 of them are signed by Dave, and one was signed by Dave and Becky Page. So Sergio will be presiding over that as our auctioneer, sort of towards the end of the evening after the panel and after the open mic time. And with that, let's bring our panelists up. Now, I feel like I was blessed and lucky to be one of Dave's friends, but I wasn't what you would call a close friend, but luckily we have lots of people here tonight who were, some of you in the audience, and some of you who will be up here on the panel. And it's going to be an opportunity to hear from them. I'm going to ask them a few questions, and just to kind of get things rolling. But also, the way we do things here at CAPS when we have a panel or when we have a speaker is we like to open it up to the membership for questions. So if you have a question at some point, we will open it up and you'll be able to ask questions of the panel. Oh, I'm sorry, one more announcement I forgot to make. We have a donation jar over here on this table here. So in addition to the guest fees, if anybody wants to make a donation to the Harry Cell Leukemia Foundation, you can either put cash or checks in there. Make checks out to, not to CAPS, or not to me personally, but to the Harry Cell Leukemia Foundation. I think all the information is over there, okay? So let's bring our panelists up. I'll just rattle off the names and you guys can come and run in and find your name card. Oh yes, thank you. We're videotaping the panel tonight for Dave's family. They were generous in providing some of the artwork that we have here tonight. And they're really pleased that we're doing this. And the one thing that they asked was that we would videotape the panel so that they could see it. So just so you're aware, we don't have any Jesse Jackson moments. Great. Okay. So guys, come up when I call your name and find your placard on the table. Scott Shaw, Mark Evanier, Rusty, Bill Ray, Jim Silk, Bill Stout, and Paul Power. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, unfortunately, we only have one mic. We used to have more, and we opened the AV equipment cabinet tonight. All of this stuff is owned by the landlord, and we found only one mic, so we're going to have to share and pass it around. So I think I'm just going to speak loud so we don't have to keep passing it back to me, and you guys can just pass it down the line.
You may not need to use it at all.
You may not, and these mics here will pick up on the video pretty good. So it's up to you, but I'll pass it down to you. Okay, first of all, I just want to ask this question of all the panelists, and you can just go one by one down the line. Where and when did you first meet Dave Stevens? And what was your relationship like? Was it a working relationship, friend, both, that kind of thing? So let's start with Scott.
I lived in San Diego through the 50s and up through the 60s, and I was one of the people that helped start the San Diego convention. And I'm sure that I met Dave either through Sheldorf or through somebody him coming to one of the committee meetings or something. I think it was probably around 1972 or so, maybe 71. Dave was really a kid. I still think that Dave was a kid because he was a few years younger than me, but he was doing fanzine art, and he lived over, I think, kind of toward National City with his parents. And we hit it off, and I think he had met Bill Ray pretty much during that time too, because I remember mentioning Bill, and I knew Bill. But Dave was very hardworking, wanted to get into the comic field, and we did some projects together, believe it or not. And I'd say that's when I met him. He was just a very eager kid wanting to break in. I remember he got all excited because somebody set up a meeting with him and Ron Ely, who was Doc Savage. And, he was a big fanboy like the rest of us, except he had a hell of a lot more ability.
Yeah, just pass that down the line.
When Scott was working with the San Diego convention, getting it started, Sheldorf, who was the founder of that group, used to organize these expeditions to Jack Kirby's house. He'd call Jack and say, "Can I come by and visit you?" Jack would say yes. Shell would say, "Can I bring a few friends?" Jack would say yes. Shell would show up with how many people?
15.
15. That's a conservative. And one of those visits, I think it may have been the same time I met Scott, Dave was there. Dave had brought up his art samples to show Jack. And all the time I knew Jack, he never discouraged anyone. You could bring him the worst art samples in the world, and he would give you encouragement. But he had two kinds of encouragement. He had the kind that was, keep at it, don't give up, just keep working hard. The other kind was, hey, you might have a career. And Dave instantly got the you might have a career kind of advice because the work was very good. By standards of Dave's later work, it was not very good. But if he had not improved from that, he could probably still have had a very wonderful career. And Dave and I ever went outside on the patio and we sat and talked comics for hours, half an hour, whatever it was. And the last few times I saw him, we were still sitting around talking comics. It was bookended both ways like that. And I think that's when I first met him. And he gave me a drawing, a charcoal drawing of a woman's head that I still have, which he did at age, 19, whatever he was at the time. And it is a beautiful drawing. I should have brought it tonight and put it in the gallery here. It's you look at that and you say, hey, that guy can draw.
Hi, I came out, I think it was in '74, to Hanna-Barbera, got a job. In fact, I came out on a visit and got the job and went back and put my stuff in storage and came out. And Dave was working there, and it was very strange. Dave was like 20 years old, and I was like 50 years old, and yet we were like two maniacs in the school running down the hall causing, shrieking and hollering and causing trouble in general. And it was just fun. He had so much fun in him, and it was like going back to school again. And we, of course, I got in when he got into the Rocketeer. We kept in touch, and we both worked in three different places at the same time, three animation houses, Filmation and I can't remember, and Hanna-Barbera and one other one. And what was I going to say? Oh, then when he had the movie coming out, he didn't have time to do a book to be released with the movie, and he called me to come in, and Bob Foster was editor on the book, and I did the Rocketeer book that came out with the movie, and I went. It was interesting going over the sets, movie sets and stuff, and Dave was, I guess, one of the very much involved in the making of the movie, and we just stayed friends always. And I'd call him up and say, "What ink are you using? Right now," and stuff like that. So there was, but sometimes a year would go by and we wouldn't have any contact. But that's about going this way.
Dave and I met in the early 70s. I don't remember exactly when. I seem to remember he was about 18 and I was 16 or 17, something along those lines. And I already thought of him as the professional. And he of course was struggling to get work, but he'd had stuff actually published in fanzines. And I think he was had inked a piece for Jack Kirby in the San Diego Comic-Con program booklet. And I remember marveling at this inking. It was inhuman, it was so perfect. But I said, I gotta meet this guy. And I don't know how I got his number, maybe through Mark or Scott or somebody, but I called him up and I went over to his house. And he was the nicest guy. And we hit it off right away. And I think I gave him something I had penciled by copying crudely, and he inked it and made it beautiful. And over the years, I moved to Hollywood, he moved to Hollywood. We hung out, we went to concerts a lot, and I can get into that more later, but that's how I met him.
When I met Dave, well, actually, I met him in the Rocketeer. I saw the magazine, and he was drawing Betty Page, and I was furious because I didn't think of that, and I'd been drawing her since 1951. Then I think I heard from Stout, I think, that he said he was going to quit doing the Rocketeer, and I didn't think he should do that, so I made a drawing of Betty, in which, the way I remember it, she says, after all you're getting off me, you can't quit now. Actually, that's not the way I wrote it. Tonight, Kelvin brought me the actual letter, and I was very timid in the way I said it, but Dave got the message. He was very aware of the slang that I grew up with in the 40s. After that, I met him at the Stout studio. We went to lunch, and we became friends, and been having, well, we had lunch almost every other week since, 1982. I think appropriate here to tell you a little story that Adam Hughes told me a month ago. Said when he met Dave, he was at I think it was WonderCon, and he was terrified, and he went up to Dave, and he said, I'm absolutely petrified to meet you. And Dave said, and he said, don't think nothing of it. I was the same way when I met Steranko. And just last year, a fan came up to Adams and said, I'm terrified to meet you, Mr. Hughes. And he said, think nothing of it. I was the same way when I met Stevens.
I first met Dave in the early 70s, probably at Comic-Con, but I don't remember the actual meeting because Dave was just sort of one of those guys with Scott's group that sort of hung around the convention, and I probably saw some drawings of his, but the first time I really recall specifically meeting Dave was right after Dave had taken over for me, assisting Russ Manning on the Tarzan of the Apes Sunday and Daily strips. And Dave came by and showed me some of his work that he'd been doing, and also showed me a sketchbook with these incredible, fabulous little drawings peppered all through the sketchbook. And my first reaction was, well, I'll never get that job back again.
I met Dave the night I arrived in Los Angeles. I was staying with Bill here because I've been corresponding with Bill, and I got to meet most of these guys here through Toth. And Dave came over and said, you want to work at Hanna-Barbera? And I went, well, yeah, okay. So I think I got a job like the next day. But we had a great time. I used to hang out with Dave all the time, and Dave, Bill Ray, and myself used to work out at the Hollywood Wine. Sergio used to watch me. Where is he? Anyway, yeah, Sergio used to work out there as well when I was boxing. Dave used to watch me go through my moves and everything. We draw a lot of jobs together and just go out, have fun, and all sorts of debauchery. But never mind, it was all good. And Dave was a fun guy. And when we worked in the Rude Room, which this is in 78, October 78 at Hanna-Barbera, there was Mike Sikowski of the Justice League. There was Russ Heath, Janine Dawson, and myself in the one cubicle, which I called the rude room, and they'll tell you why. And then Lloyd Norman was there, Bob Foster, Scott was just across the hall. It was a little madhouse, and I was a madman in the madhouse, and it was great fun, just real great fun. And Dave was terrific.
Well, thanks guys, that's, I'm amazed because it's a lot of stuff that I've never heard before about Dave, so it's really, it seems like Bill, you, the studio that you had with Dave was kind of a meeting place for cartoonists.
Yeah.
Who else worked in that studio, and what was it like? What were the years that you guys were working there?
Yeah, let's see. Well, it was the studio was at 812 South La Brea, just below Wilshire Boulevard, and I started out initially having the back room. Eventually, I acquired the entire space, and I decided to sublet it. I sublet it to Richard Hescox, who's a friend of mine and a paperback illustrator, and he also did covers for Marvel. And then Richard split his space into two and sublet it to Dave. So that was, man, I'd have to check my records.
81, 82, right in there.
Something like that. 79, 80.
Long time ago.
Yeah. Paul says 76, 77. Could be right.
Yeah.
But it was a lively group. It was a great time to be a cartoonist in Los Angeles too, because we all knew each other. It was a fairly small group of people, and we used to. There was a group that worked at Marvel called the Krusty Bunkers. That whenever anybody was having a tough time with the deadline, a bunch of guys would get together and pitch in. And we had our sort of own West Coast version of that. Especially when we were working on the Edgar S. Burroughs comics for Russ Manning. Some guys would get into deadline trouble, and Dave and I and other people would help pitch in. We'd just go over to the guy's apartment or house and work all night long till the job was done. Dave was like that. And Dave, you couldn't meet Dave without loving Dave, and so Dave attracted a lot of friends, and they would show up at the studio, and because of the kind of work that we did, the variety of work that we did, we got to meet a lot of interesting people. It was a very good time. We were at the studio for, I think, more than a decade.
And what sort of, did you work on jobs together or all separately? And what kind of jobs do you remember Dave working on at the time?
We usually worked separately. I was having an extremely successful time. I had more work than I knew what to do with, and I threw a lot of work Dave's way and a lot of work Richard's way. I got Dave some jobs doing some advertising for motion pictures, which was the mainstay of my work back then. And then also, it was about that time I started doing production design for motion pictures as well. And I was production designer on an American Godzilla film that never got made, and I was able to hire Dave and Doug Wildty to storyboard the film with me.
Did the Thriller there too, didn't you? You worked on Thriller.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I got a call from John Landis. He wanted me to storyboard this music video for Michael Jackson called Thriller. And I was just too busy, so I passed that job on to Dave.
Perfect.
And Dave did a lot of work for Michael after that as well.
Let me tell a tangential story about that. I was I visited the studio one night, just dropped in, and this was quite a bit after Dave had gotten disenchanted with Michael at a certain point. He never went into why, but he told me, Michael Jackson's been calling me all night. He's driving me crazy. The guy's like a stalker. So Dave was like being stalked by Michael Jackson. He goes, there are the phones again. You pick it up. Pick it up and insult him or something. Because I was good at doing stuff like that. So, hey, hello?
Can I speak to Dave?
Dave who?
Dave Stevens, this is his studio, right?
Yeah, who's this?
It's Michael.
Michael who?
He knows who I am.
And I said, no, Dave's not here. And Dave's like, he ran out of the room because he couldn't contain himself.
All right, will you tell him to call me? He's supposed to call me.
Anyway, that's the end of that story.
Here we go.
So then,
Warming up.
I also got work on my first major film was Conan the Barbarian, and the director of Conan the Barbarian was at the same time producing 1941. So Steven Spielberg's office was across the hall from mine. So when we finished work on Conan, Ron Cobb and I would finish work on Conan during the day, we'd go to Steven's office and kick around ideas for Steven's next project, which was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And Steven tried to get me to jump ship and storyboard Raiders. I wouldn't do that, but I recommended Dave for the job, and Dave ended up storyboarding the truck sequence, Indy's fight with the Nazi on the truck.
Yeah, Scott?
Bill's story about Dave trying to duck Michael Jackson is one of countless stories about Dave trying to duck people. When I moved up to LA in 1975, Dave was real anxious to come up too, so I was in a little apartment that I think wound up on Dragnet during the 1960s, and got Dave a room there too. And we actually had 4 different cartoonists living in this 8-apartment combination there. The others was an underground cartoonist named Patrick Cosgrove, and a gal who also is no longer with us named Sean Carey, who was an amazing cartoonist. She was working at the same time for Disney Publishing and for Hustler. She had the widest range of gigs of anybody I ever knew at the same time. Anyway, Dave got an apartment that was kind of between Patrick's and mine. And Dave, I remember, would always be working on these projects that, you know, for Dave, it was as beautiful and as slow as a glacier. And I'd come in the morning, and he had this obsession for getting stills of everybody. You know, in those days, this was pre-videotape. And he'd have surround himself. I remember he was inking this thing that Rick Hoberg did, the Master of Kung Fu What If story. And he had like 8,000 pictures of Bruce Lee everywhere because he thought that Bruce Lee should look like Shang-Chi or vice versa. And anyway, we kind of keep track of each other. And I know a page over there that I brought in from the Edgar Rice Burroughs books, believe it or not, I actually was Dave's assistant inking vines and backgrounds and stuff, because, like I say, we all know Dave was very painstaking. But every once in a while, something would come up and Dave had to, like, disappear, and I was one of the only people he'd let know was actually there. And he'd close all the blinds and everything. He had crazy women after him, crazy editors after him, and he would just kind of fade into the pattern of his studio, and I'd sneak him down food every so often, or come down to our apartment to work and then actually leave the place empty. But it was, it would have made a good sitcom, I think, because there was this one woman in particular who he was convinced that her girlfriend was a witch and had put a curse on Dave. And Dave really bought into this, considering he was a minister's son. I don't know if that had something to do with him accepting the supernatural or what, but it was it was really fun. He always kind of protecting Dave. And in that apartment building, some of the other guests or people living there were eccentric in their own way. I remember this lesbian couple dressing Dave up in drag for Halloween one year, and Dave was damn pretty. He was like 3/4 of the way into drag and then started to panic, realizing that this guy was talking into this. But that was the same party I found out years later Ed Wood showed up at, and I'm surprised they didn't compare, dressing tips. But It was a wonderful time. I should also mention, by the way, going back to the San Diego days, Mark wrote a story for Mike Friedrich was putting out what he called a ground level comic that was essentially trying to grab a little bit of the lightning that Howard the Duck did. It was called Quack. And Mark came up with a character called Cosmo Cat, which was a funny animal thing. Now, you don't think of Dave as doing funny animals, but I laid the thing out real rough, and then Dave actually did the finished art. And on projects like that, we got a fellow to letter him that probably is never known anywhere else in the comic business, signed his name Bud Gutz, G-U-T-Z. And that was Dave's dad, who was a minister and also a good letterer. So we had a minister lettering underground comics, essentially, which is probably unique in the annals of comics.
It's like Russ has something.
Yes.
I was saying that we worked at at least three different animation houses. And I remember one, I can't remember the name of it, but it was up on Hazeltine or one of those streets. And the boss, our boss, he looked like, he was a big bulky guy, gruff as hell, white-haired. He reminded me of, what's the guy with the guitar that,
Garcia?
Johnny Cash.
El Capone.
big guy.
Big guy?
Red hair.
Red hair?
Yeah. Charlie Rich. No, he used to play like somebody's plantation owner.
Burl Ives. Burl Ives.
Huh?
Burl Ives.
Burl Ives. So you gotta go know how rough this boss looked like. And so anyway, the boss sat right here facing me, and I sat here facing there. Dave was right behind me. Now, I'm an only child, so I had some oddities about me. I didn't care for the tissue they had in the men's room. So I had my own. And so when Dave would see me leave the room with the roll, he knew where I was going. And he'd come out and he'd take a bunch of towels and put them in the sink and soak them up good and throw them over on me. And I'd be yelling, damn it all, Dave. Turn that light on, or something. So, we did this back and forth to each other constantly. So one day I decided, took my roll and I left the room. And I decided I want to know what the bathroom was like on one of the other floors. Maybe some of the execs go up there and it's nicer. So just to break the monotony, I'll go up there. So I come back and I sit down, and when I came in, Dave looked at me kind of oddly. And I thought, I wonder why he looked like that. So finally, I found out what happened. Dave went after me, and he went in. He's looking under. In those days, I wore cowboy boots, and so did the boss. And he's looking in. So he heaves the towels over, and he doesn't get any reaction whatsoever. So finally Dave can't stand it, and he says, "Why didn't you holler when I threw the towels over?" And the boss says, "Aha!" Next. Oh, God. I just shot my best one.
I'm curious as to when Dave started the Rocketeer. Like, what was the genesis of that? Did he do it with the idea he was going to pitch it to a major publisher, or was Pacific Comics already like an entity, or how did that all happen?
My understanding is that Pacific Comics was being formed, and they went to Dave and said, "You want to do something?" And Pacific Comics was revolutionary at the time because a year before Pacific Comics was founded, there was really no intelligent place where you could create a comic and not lose total ownership of it immediately. You could do it for very small undergrounds where there was no money, and it didn't look like a real comic book. But Pacific, Steve Shanis and Bill Shanis, who formed the company, to lure people away from the talent pool of DC that DC and Marvel generally tapped into, made this very nice creator ownership deal. And I think Dave was one of the first people they approached. And Dave suddenly realized that he had been, they'd grown up around comic people and having met guys like Kirby and Siegel and Schuster, and being quite well aware of what it did to you to create something and then lose ownership to it. Dave was very possessive about his work in a very good way because he poured so much of himself into it. I can't imagine anything more traumatizing for Dave than creating something and then losing it to other people and other people's control. And now he had this opportunity, and I think that's where the Rocketeer was born. In the back of, was the book Star Slayer? Or
Star Slayer.
Star
Yeah,
Slayer,
Mike Grell book.
Mike Grell was doing this book, and Mike didn't have time to do the whole book, so there was like a 6 or 7 page chunk in the back.
It's only, what,
and they
3
gave it to
pages
Dave.
or 4
And
pages?
I think he took
Yeah,
longer to do the
really
6 or 7 page chunk than Grell did to do the front of the book.
Yeah.
But, and you know, almost instant. I can't recall too many strips that ever appeared and became star features instantly. It took Dave, you know, sometime during the 2nd or 3rd page of that comic, the whole industry fell in love with it.
Yeah, Dave was at my studio when he created the Rocketeer. Initially, this was a story that Dave Scroggie told me. Initially, Scroggie got him to come into Shanus and Shanus and with the idea of doing a comic book, and Dave brought along a picture of Commando Cody that he had drawn, the Rocket Man from the serials. And Dave said, this is the comic book I want to do. Well, they weren't too sure about what the rights situation was on Rocket Man. And so Dave said, you know what, well, let me take this back. Let me come up with something similar, but that I'll change enough so that it's really my own. And what that ended up being was the Rocketeer.
Oh, I got a little to add to that. Yeah, you're pretty right with that. Except when we were at Hanna-Barbera, this is when Russ was there as well, we were in the room, and he did want to do Commando Cody and all that. And I had done my strip, Professor Ron, and I said, well, why don't you just change it? And he did. He had the whole concept of Betty Page, himself as Commando Cody, and then he changed it for his own thing. But that was like back in 78, 79, that he already had that planned out. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, he already had done a Betty Page Comics cover, and he told me so that when Secord needed a girlfriend, there was Betty, and so he went with it. He'd been looking at Betty pictures since he was 10 or 12 years old, and even had some of the films, as I recall, the 16 millimeter stuff.
Yeah, I had an old 60 millimeter projector at the studio, and at night Dave would bring his Betty films in, and we'd just project them on the wall and watch them. That was my first introduction to Betty Page.
So was he enamored of Betty as far back as you remember?
Yeah.
Everybody
He
was.
was
I was
just a
tearing them
kid,
out of the
yeah.
book in the 50s.
Right. That's where my file starts in 1951, yeah. Yeah.
So,
Which
did you want to add
month?
something, Doug?
Well, it's not a Rocketeer thing. It was just before the Rocketeer. David had created a thing called Wee Willie,
Yeah.
which was an animation presentation that he wanted to do about, this was about, I have a drawing in my book that's dated 79, and I believe he'd been working on it maybe his whole life. It was in his mind, I don't know. But the idea was a lost alien comes to this planet, is befriended by a boy who hides him and wants to help him get back home. This is set in the 1930s during the Depression. The boy's a paper boy, and the drawing I have of Wee Willie is he's in a little bellhop uniform. He's a little more humanoid than where I'm going with this. But this presentation was presented to Steven Spielberg, who said, gee, Dave, this is a really great project, but I'm working on something very similar to it. So thanks, but no thanks.
He was lying.
He was lying.
Well, he said that Spielberg's story of his muse of E.T. was that he had an imaginary childhood friend. But I don't see anywhere where it said his imaginary childhood friend came from outer space. But the thing that struck me, as I remember, I haven't seen it since, but there was a piece of presentation art of the boy on a bicycle, flying through the air with the moon behind him. And as far as I know, he never got any compensation for that. And I was on Dave. I said, "You're going to sue Spielberg." When E.T. came out, I said, "You're going to sue him." And it's like, no way. I want to live in this town. I want to work for these people. I'm not going to do a thing about it. And he didn't, but, and I've always wondered about that. If he had, what would he be known for now? The guy who sued Steven Spielberg and maybe won, maybe lost, I don't know, but it's just a story I thought people should know about.
Show the drawing.
Yes.
I don't think they can see it from up here, but if anybody wants to look at it when we're done here, please come and have a look.
Yeah, yours is,
I thought it was just me.
So,
Yeah.
oh, did you want to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's also should be noted that it was never a secret that the Peavy character was based on Doug Wilding. And
It was Doug Wilder.
Was wild, yeah.
And when Dave came to Hanna-Barbera, it was early in 1979, I believe, or late in 78. And he came in to work on the Godzilla show, which Doug Wildey was producing. And they hit it off immediately. And
That's when I came in.
I got the story for that.
And well, the thing that a lot of people noticed was Dave was just as meticulous doing layouts as any other drawings that he did. And the problem was layouts were just kind of a guide used for the animators. Those drawings never wound up in the cartoon. And Dave would, maybe do 1 or 2 a day, and everybody else was doing 6 or 7. And Fitzgerald was doing about 90 a day. And Dave never got hassled because of his slow turn, because he and Wildey loved and respected each other. But the funny thing is when some of those shows are on DVD now, and I was looking, and I could tell which scenes Dave had laid out because it's the prettiest looking Godzilla you've ever seen. He's got eyelashes and 3 highlights in his eyes, but he and Doug were, they were, personality-wise, they were kind of polar opposites, but they got along so well that Dave kind of had this shield of immunity from the usual Hanna-Barbera bullshit because he was Doug's favorite young protege.
I think everybody knew he was a prodigy and a genius, so it was like, better give this guy some slack,
Yeah.
He's a
because
different character.
he's going to go down in history.
Here's the story of how Dave got into Hanna-Barbera. One season, a man named Don Jurwich, who many people in this room know, was producing Super Friends, and Doug Wildey was coming in to produce Godzilla, which were competing networks, and Don and Doug did not like each other. Instantly. Doug clashed with a lot of people. Doug was a very abrasive guy, a very brilliant, wonderful man, but he had a tendency to insult other people who deserved insulting and some who didn't. Don Jurwich comes up to me when I was doing Scooby-Doo or Richie Rich or one of those shows. He comes up to me one day and he says, "You know a lot of superhero artists, right?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, comic book guys, yeah." He said, have to do Super Friends with they decided to be a bunch of Yogi Bear artists. These guys can't draw superheroes. You know anybody we can hire who can do superheroes? And I said, sure. So I sent him Will Mineo, Larry Houston, Dave, Rick Hoberg, Larry Houston, and about 8 guys. Don Rickover was one of them. And these guys all went in to work on Super Friends, and within 3 weeks, Doug Wildey had stolen all of them away for Godzilla. Doug was very charismatic. Doug was the guy who'd done Johnny Quest. Doug was an artist they respected, and Doug had a way of getting what he wanted. And I'm sitting in my office one day, and Joe Barbera's secretary runs in and says to me, "Mark, you got to go out in the parking lot. Don Jurwich and Doug Wildey are having a fist fight." And what they were fighting about was Dave, because Dave had snuck over to the Godzilla
Was he dressed as a girl that day?
Yeah, no, he was not. Doug and Don were, but he wasn't. And there was this bizarre meeting in Bill Hanna's office, 20 minutes. They had to be physically separated, and it was this bizarre meeting in Bill Hanna's office, which I somehow found myself in, where they're negotiating, okay, you can have Don Rico on Monday and Tuesday, and they were fighting over, basically, they were fighting over Dave. So they wanted Dave, even though Doug already realized that Dave was going to do the 3 drawings a week. I remember standing, there was another artist who was very fast who worked for Hanna-Barbera named Jack Manning, and I remember being in the hallway one time there, and Jack is yawning and tired because he said, oh God, I did 90 scenes this week, and Owen Fitzgerald is going, oh God, I'm exhausted, I did 110 scenes this week, and Dave is going, oh, I'm exhausted, I did 8 scenes this week. And like Scott said, nobody faulted Dave for that. Doug protected him because he knew how valuable he was. There was a rule at Hanna-Barbera at that time, it may have been there for quite some time. They did not do dialogue in profile. The character was speaking, you saw him full face, or you saw him in 3/4, but they were never in profile because it cost $1.10 more to animate or something like that. And there was a scene in a Godzilla show that Dave, for some reason, became enamored of the idea that there should be, the character had one line. There was some scene where somebody had to say, yes, and that was the whole pivotal turning point of the episode and the scene. I don't remember the context. And Dave became maniacal that scene was going to be delivered in profile. And he laid it out in profile and drew it in profile, and Bill Hanna saw it and hit the roof and said, no, we don't do dialogue in profile. And Dave relayed it out in profile again from the other side. And it was bounced again, and Dave went in and he went to Bill Hanna's office, and you didn't do this. You didn't argue. You didn't go to Bill Hanna and say, please spend money on something because, before you got the verb out of your mouth, the answer was already no. And they fought for it, and he got the only line of profile dialogue in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon of that decade, or probably the one before and after.
And that was the best Godzilla
Ever, yes.
Okay,
Shining
I
moment
wanted
in the sea
to
of shit.
touch back on something that Jim said about the Betty Page cover, comic book cover that was done before Rocketeer. So is that the Jungle?
That's the Jungle, yeah, Jungle Princess, what is it, Captured Jungle Princess, yeah.
So
right.
what was that done for?
He did that for himself, as far as I know, and of course he said he took it everywhere, and of course nobody wanted it.
So that was a portfolio.
That was, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Wasn't that kind of his tribute to Frazetta's Thunder
Yeah.
with Betty Page thrown
Yeah.
in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's got
Yeah.
the thunder background, which is a little racist, but
Oh, is that the one with the natives all
the
rearing
na-
in
the
from
natives.
all-
With the
in the
file
background,
teeth and
yeah.
yeah. I'd always go, Dave, are you
little
sure you want to
racist.
show this to me? It looks great, but
So,
Yeah,
so Betty, when did he actually discover the real Betty? And
The real,
yeah, how did
Oh,
he find Betty, and what was their relationship like?
the,
don't forget the tagline.
we didn't know where she was. I was doing a book for the Betty Page Queen of Hearts. Nobody knew where she was. He didn't really find her. I think it was the rich and famous people that found her. That show that interviewed the rich and famous.
Oh, Lifestyles of the Rich and
Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And I think he met her, God, I don't know, I think it was through Hefner that they made contact with her.
Okay.
And somehow he became her friend, you know. I'd call him up and he'd say, I'm carrying birdseed for Betty. She needed birdseed. She'd call Dave and he'd get him birdseed.
Now, I also remember hearing that he championed her cause to get royalties for all the imagery that started popping up on.
She got a
merchandise
lawyer
and so
that
forth.
got a hold of her, and we all made deals with the lawyer, except he spent all the money on himself, flying around trying to meet supermodels. She eventually ended up with Curtis, and we all contribute to Curtis. Dave and I Well, we did it on our own at first, and now Dark Horse does it, and everybody contributes for Betty.
What is Curtis?
Curtis Management, they handle Marilyn Monroe and a lot of other famous folks. I just think it's Dave's commitment to what he loves. I remember talking to him once about how Frank Frazetta had told my son, you know, draw what you love. Even if it's big tits, draw big tits, you know. You gotta really love it. And, yeah, and if you're gonna stay with it, you through your life, you better love it. And Dave's integrity along those lines was enormous, and I think that's what he got from his mother and father, because his life was lived the same way. There's just tremendous integrity in his work, as you can see, and we all know, all the artists I know recognize it instantly. The funny thing was that after that conversation with Dave about what Frazetta had said, these drawings began to appear in which there are enormous nipples on Dave's characters.
Thank you, Frank.
You know, but he was furious at all these rubber eraser nipples that every artist draws. You know, so, and I'm not quite sure where that came from. One of his models is here tonight. She claims no responsibility. But
Master of aerial shading.
it's just his passion for everything that he did. He got involved in it, you know. I mean,
So speaking of that, what did Dave get angry about? Because every time I met Dave, he was always kind and you know, he didn't really grouse about much.
He got angry about
Happy guy.
the reproduction of his work.
Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
It was impossible to print it properly. And if they did print it properly, then he got mad at himself for not doing a better job. If they printed it properly, then he'd see flaws that no one else would possibly perceive. He got mad at, he got enormously mad at people who caused him legal problems. He had some very ugly legal entanglements over the name Rocketeer and the various contracts on some of the projects. I sent Dave to my lawyer, who was a man named Henry Holmes. Some of you may know Henry, who is a hugely successful. Henry Holmes is the man who made the deal for the George Foreman Grill. It was George Foreman's lawyer. And he did a lot of pro bono stuff, or charging people like myself and Dave for 1 out of every 10 hours he spent because he made it back on grills. But he handled some of Dave's stuff for a while. When they made the deal for the Rocketeer movie, Dave had asked for some sort of guarantee that the Betty character would be Betty. At this point, Betty Page whereabouts was unknown, and Disney said, no, we've got to change it, just in case she surfaces and sues. And Dave was ready to blow the whole deal off because he was determined that he was going to see Betty Page. He thought Betty Page was as important an element of the property as the Rocketeer himself. And Henry, I went to lunch, and Henry talked him out of this. Henry said, no, you can't be 100% certain that Betty is not going to surface someplace. And Henry talked Dave into backing down on that. And then sure enough, Betty showed up a couple years later.
Yeah.
And I think Dave was ultimately happy that he'd backed down on that, because otherwise somehow Disney would have had some sort of additional claim on her likeness somehow, or there would have been a messy entanglement over that. But the main thing Dave was really mad about was reproduction, and when he was not allowed to do what he did so well, when people got in the way of, you know, I remember him getting enormously mad at a publisher, one comic publisher who was holding him to a contract that David signed a contract, and you know, all of a sudden there was a new clause in it that was arguable, and he felt he'd been snookered, and he was furious. We took him out and calmed him down as much as we could. He'd been, you know, we all get swindled a little over projects, but for Dave, every project was such a major thing that what was being stolen from him in this case was several months of his life. He had to do a project with a publisher he didn't want, and let them publish his work without the kind of controls he wanted. And yeah, that upset him.
What was?
I can tell you something he was
oh,
mad
yeah,
about.
go ahead.
I can tell you a lot of things he was mad about, but because I think Dave was very good at kind of molding himself to his different friends, and I'm a big complainer. So when we would hang out together and do comic book pages together or whatever it might be, he did some grousing. But it was always kind of a bluff, because let's say we would get some pencils to ink that were absolutely horrible, the most god-awful work that you can imagine, and we would have to turn it into Russ Manning, or he would have to. And he would bitch and complain and moan the whole time, and I'd say, you want me to ink a little of those background leaves for you? No, I got it, I'll do it. He worked on my stuff all the time, but even just a crappy inking job, he wanted to do it himself. He wanted to do it absolutely perfectly, just the right way. I think there was one time there was a Mike Royer job where he let me ink one panel, and I practically had to threaten him to let me do it, because it was that's just how he was. But I'm digressing here for a second. I wanted to tell another story about that. Nobody's going to believe this, but Dave used to also say that he hated drawing. He absolutely hated what he did. It was absolute torture to him, because of this standard that he had done was so high that he had to just kill himself for everything. And that used to just drive me crazy. I would just say, you've got this gift, this amazing gift that would kill to be you, and the ability that you have. And I don't think he really meant that. It was a love-hate relationship. He loved what he did, and he wouldn't have done it that way if he didn't love it. But it was a lot of hard work for the small amount of work he really did. He put so much into it.
Bill, I'll never forget, I've quoted this for years. One night Dave was going off about the pressure and about the lack of appreciation. And Dave had one of these kind of lives. He loved kind of the weird underbelly of life. He was fascinated by it, I guess, because he hadn't experienced it himself yet.
Oh, yeah.
He loved Tom Waits' music. And he used to go to these horrible diners over in North Hollywood. And one night he told me, he says, I just hate doing this. He goes, I'm going to quit and take a job with no pressure at all. And I said, what job is that? And he said, I want to be a short order cook.
Would have spent months making one meatloaf.
Would have been the best meatloaf you ever had.
Yeah, the perfectionism applied to every aspect. I remember he ran into a period of time where nothing was coming up. No drawings, you remember this. And I would still see him, and he'd bitch and grouse about, what had been done, and why aren't you doing anything? He avoided it. And this went on for months. And finally I got him to tell me. And he was picking a color for the bathroom. And, Kelvin's been through this, others been through going around the city of Los Angeles, checking paint shops, trying to find the right cut for this little teeny bathroom off his studio in Studio City. And it was like that with everything. But he was his own worst enemy. I mean, he did a commission of Bridget Bardot. He didn't have good photos of Bridget, so he came through my files, and he got a really good photo, and all he needed to do was the portrait. So he put her on top of a motorcycle with all the parts showing. So he's rendering, he got Bridget, fine. Then he spent months and months and months doing the motorcycle because it had to be perfect. And he did the same with Mimi Rodin. He was going to try to do the movie, so Mimi is a character, and he was fascinated with all the churches, the Gothic churches in Paris, in which he had hundreds and hundreds of photos, and he found one full of skulls. So he's got Mimi in front of 1,000 skulls. all of which got to be rendered into minute detail. And he did it, but the film never got off the ground. Anyway, go.
Talking about Dave's meticulous attitude, many of you probably have Greg Preston's book of photos of cartoonists in their studios called The Artist Within.
Yes.
He got Dave's portrait in his studio, and in order to get that photo, Dave had to try on 9 pairs of shoes. Greg was here earlier, and he confirmed. He says, yeah, 9 pairs of shoes for
You're
one
just
photo.
right. Are they in the
Shoes
shot?
actually show it in the photo?
Yeah, they did, surprisingly, but it would have been the same if they didn't.
Was it his favorite heels or?
Yeah.
Dave wasn't a vain guy, he just wanted to have everything just right.
Well, he kept that beard and mustache in order right up to the last day. He took care of himself. And he was laughing right up to the last day, which is great.
Well, before I open up the floor to questions from the audience, I want to ask one final question, which is from each of you, if you haven't already told it, what is your favorite Dave Stevens story?
Can't tell it.
Can't tell it.
Well, we can always edit the tape.
Paul's got about 12 of those, right, Paul?
Yeah, I got
Okay.
quite a few, yeah.
Wow.
I got one girl's story I can tell.
It doesn't have to be a girl story.
Well, these guys have all got my relationship with Dave was lunch and conversations about philosophy and George Stevens' directing style and that kind of stuff. But when I fell in love at the age of 68, whatever it was, and was acting like a teenager, I'm the only guy that ever went to Dave Stevens and asked for advice on how to deal with women. And he told me, he said, she lives in the same condo? Never date a woman that lives in the same condo. So I married her.
Favorite
Go
story?
ahead, give a good one.
Well, can we tell the stories now?
Well, you know,
Not yet.
just keep in mind we have a mixed crowd,
Oh, yeah, all right.
so be gentle.
Yeah. All right. Well, actually the first day, I can tell this one. The first day I worked at Hanna-Barbera, we were in the old building. Scott was there, and Russ was down the hall. We were working on Godzilla, and Dave was in the next cubicle. And I was pretty well built in those days, like a little pocket Hercules. And all these no, seriously.
But he was.
Yeah.
He's scary.
These girls would always come in that day and they go, "Oh, I really love your father's work." And I'm like, "Oh, well, my old man did work for the Krays, who were gangsters." But, you know, I went, "How'd they know that?" And these girls kept coming in, and Dave would pop his head over and go, "Hey, g'day, how do you like it?" I said, "Well, these Yankee birds are all right, aren't they?" So these girls kept coming in. "Well, my last name is Power." He told all these birds that I was Tyrone Power's son. And I tell you what, I didn't tell him I wasn't either.
I got two things. One is, Dave, despite his reputation, wasn't actually slow as an artist. I saw when, I watched him produce the Rocketeer out of my studio, and when he was cooking, the pages would just fly off the table. I mean, he would really, really produce. But the thing is, Dave loved people. If he would get a phone call, that'd be an hour or two shot. So if he got 3 phone calls, the day was done without him getting work, because he couldn't work and talk on the phone at the same time. So when he was actually working, he worked at a pretty good clip. The other story I wanted to tell is just an example of the kind of loyalty that Dave inspired in his friends. Joe Johnson was the director of the Rocketeer, and he and Dave became pretty close. And one day, Jeffrey Katzenberg called Joe Johnson into his office for a presentation. Joe showed up, and Katzenberg had commissioned all these new designs of the Rocketeer's helmet, radically different from Dave's design. And Katzenberg was very proud of the work that had been done. And he said, well, what do you think? And Joe Johnson said, I think they're great. Who are you going to get to direct the film?
He's right. They would bitch and moan about everything and his deadlines, and then we go to lunch and talk for 3 hours.
Go ahead, Russ.
Dave at one point got behind on some of his earlier Rocketeer stuff and called me over to help, and I thought, that rarely works out. To my experience has been, but I jumped, ran over and so on, and then we ended up going to one of those terrible delicatessens or whatever that he was talking about, and had dinner and so on, and so I can't imagine he must have gotten further behind because I helped him. I mean, it's just didn't. You can't be. Best part of any artist is his own unique personality, and you can't get that from someone else to have him do your personality. And I don't think I've always resisted that helping, and of course I had what we're just talking about, the editor on Godzilla,
Doug Wildey?
Doug Wildey, called me once on his newspaper strip. I forget the name of it.
Ambler?
Ambler was the name of the
Yes,
strip.
yes. To help him, to come and help me. I wanted him to call. I called him to come over and help me, and I said, just do this part down here. Doesn't matter if it looks like yours or mine, because it's not important to the picture. And he couldn't do it. He was just blocked off because I said, just do it the way you do it, And it's again an example of it not working. Boom.
Anybody else? I know Scott's got another story.
Well, they're not particularly funny. They're kind of bittersweet. I remember not many years ago at all, Mark and I and Dave and Floyd Norman all got together and recorded a conversation to remember Mike Sikowski, who had worked with us at Hanna-Barbera. And we talked a lot about Hanna-Barbera, and I don't mean to act like that's some high point in his career, but it was a fun time. We had a lot of fun in that department, layout department. And Dave showed up with an armload of Xeroxes or original sketches that Mike had done of Dave. And at the time they were funny, but 20 years later they were hilarious because, poor Dave was never a strapping kind of guy. And Sikowski got unlimited mileage out of drawing Dave looking like a beanpole and all these things that were happening to him and women chasing him and everything. And it's kind of hard to believe that we were there with Dave and Dave showing us this stuff, and now we're doing the same thing with Dave. I think my favorite story about Dave, I wasn't even there for, but Dave knew my wife, and I don't know if he'd met our son Kirby yet, our security guard back there, but the word had pretty much gotten through the community that Dave had a serious health issue. But I hadn't told Judy, and certainly not Kirby. Kirby was a lot younger. And they saw Dave at the San Diego Con, and we're talking to him, and Kirby had a sketchbook, and Dave wasn't doing drawings because it just, even a casual sketch just took too much out of him, and if somebody saw him drawing for one person, then everybody else wanted to draw him. And Kirby asked if he could have a drawing of the Rocketeer, and he kind of looked around so nobody was looking. He goes, well, if it's for Kirby, I'll do it. And he did this wonderful drawing. And I asked Kirby, I said, would you like to bring it tonight? He goes, no. He goes, it means too much to me. I don't want anything to happen to it. So I think that's my favorite story about Dave. Is it's a tiny example of what a generous guy he was.
Paul?
Yeah. Yeah, just toss it.
Anybody turn that thing off?
This
Yeah,
this was
even sound like
when
it's
Bill
working
and I and Dave were working out at the Hollywood Y, And Wildy, this is when I was boxing, and Doug Wildy wanted to come after work with Don Rico. And who was that Asian bird that was there? Anyway,
Emily?
Some Asian bird that was working with us at Hanna-Barbera.
Emily.
Yeah.
Emily Kong.
Yeah, Emily Kong. So, and
Asian bird.
they originally were, sorry, the way I talk.
You didn't say Chinaman.
Anyway, so I used to, as soon as I'd finish work, I'd go straight to the Hollywood Y, either go with Bill Ray here or with Dave, and I'd do my boxing workout. And originally, they were supposed to turn up at 6 o'clock when I started. Well, I'd finished, they weren't there, and I sparred 8 rounds, and then did a weight workout, and I was buggered. So I go down to the showers, I'm ready to get in the shower. Then suddenly Dave comes downstairs, I'm naked, and he's like going, look, they've turned up. I said, you're joking. I said, I'm finished, I'm done. He said, no, you've got to do it, Doug's here. So I went, oh, all right, so I get my gear back on, and I do this half-assed workout up there. And then Don Rico's like going, my brother was a boxer, you're not so good. And so and then I went, all right, now you got me. So I really turned it on. But man, I was exhausted. And Wildy said, well, I bet a few fins on you. But Stevens was holding the bag for me, and that was it, man. I just had to crawl home after that. That was tough.
Yeah, Mark.
Doesn't matter. Just don't worry about it.
Asian bird. I thought he meant cashew chicken. Anyway.
What are
A term
you?
for women, birds.
Dave and I had used to have last year or two of Dave's life. We had dinner we were supposed to have dinner every month, and it turned out like every 3 months. He'd call up every so often and say, I can't make it this month. I'm just, either he was not doing well health-wise, or he was doing well and he had to make up work that he couldn't do when he was having his health problem. And he'd come over to my house, and the rule was we'd talk about his health for 10 minutes, and then we'd never mention it again. The rest of the evening we'd spend talking about women and comics, or comics and women, and whichever, or sometimes we got some overlap going there. And we went to a restaurant one night at a little Chinese place, where I think we had the cashew chicken, and on La Cienega. And Dave was sitting there having, for some reason I remember having beef with broccoli. I don't know why I remember that. And we were talking about bad movies and comics and things like that. And the waitress came over to the table and said, I heard you mentioning a Rocketeer, that name had drifted someplace. Were you involved with that movie? And I said no. Dave said yes. And she started telling us, I think she thought it was like, a crew guy. She didn't know this was the guy behind the Rocketeer. And she started telling us how much she just loved that movie, and how terrific it was, and she loved it. She'd gone to see it, and then she'd gone back and taken some of her friends, taken her son with it, and things like that. And Dave, as we all know, Dave had mixed feelings about the film. Some parts of it didn't come out the way he wanted, and it wasn't quite the success that maybe people were hoping for. But after she left, Dave turned to me and he said, that makes it all worth it. That kind of reaction here and there. It's people know my character. He was like real touched by it, and I remember that now. I hadn't thought about that for a while.
Nice.
And it's very. I don't know if this is appropriate to say or not. Some of us have a right to be mad that we lost Dave. You think of all the people who ought to die.
And Dave's not one of them.
Yeah, if I made a list of everybody I know who deserves to go, Dave would be at the absolute bottom of the list. I've got at least 20 agents way above that. And
Producers.
you feel like something's been taken from you, like someone has come in and taken one of your body parts away, or something very precious to you. And it's taken a couple of months for me to stop thinking, when are Dave and I going to have lunch again? Well, we're not going to have lunch again. We're not, And I just feel like we're going to do a panel at San Diego, at the San Diego Comic Convention on Sunday at 11 a.m. in room 7AB. I asked for an hour and a half. They gave me an hour. please come to that, and we'll continue this dialogue there. And tell your friends who couldn't make it tonight. We're going to talk about Dave and tell more Dave stories there, and keep it going. Because I can't remember anyone. We've all lost loved ones. We've lost people in our age bracket. We've lost people we were friends with. I can't remember anyone else where we're trying so hard not to turn loose of a person. We're trying to hold on. That's what we're having this evening. We're trying not to lose Dave and keep him around and keep him. And putting together books of his work, which will be beautiful volumes and hardcover. The day Dave passed away, or day after, I put a thing on my weblog about it. I mentioned there was a book out there, the art of Dave Stevens book was being compiled. 2 different publishers called me that day and said, I don't know if it would be appropriate, if this is too early, but we'd like to publish that book. I said, I think it's a little early to be asking that. I can't recall anybody. I've unfortunately presided over way too many eulogies and way too many funerals, and I can't remember anybody who meant so much to so many people and just left that kind of shock that we're all still reeling from. And I thought somebody ought to say that here. Thank you.
Okay. Let's open it up to the crowd. Anybody who wants to, and just for the benefit of the video, you guys, if you get a question, just kind of reiterate the question in your answer so that they can hear.
Well, this isn't a question, but a story. I met Dave, 30-some years ago at Scott's Cartoon apartment complex. And, he was just 19 and phenomenally talented. He had these monster portraits that were just inspiring and kind of made me, oh man, I can't do this because he's so good. But I can't remember who went on this trip, but a bunch of us went to this punk rock club, and there were 4 or 5 of us, and Dave drove. At some point in the evening, he met this cute blonde chick who was stoned or drunk or something, and he just kind of took her, under his wing, and he was going to help her get home. So when we left the club, there were all of us spring chickens walking through Hollywood, and this car full of, rough characters who didn't, had too much time on their hands, kind of slowed down, and they spotted this girl that Dave was protecting and started saying, hey, we'd like to get to know her better. And so we just kind of tried to ignore them and, walked in. Scott, were you there that night?
I was nowhere near that.
I can't remember.
That wasn't a punk rock.
But anyway, we were walking down a side street in Hollywood, and these guys were just, really threatening and scaring the crap out of us. So we turned the corner, and they kind of sped up, and then they turned around and parked their car behind a hedge. And we're going, oh good, Dave's car is before we get to this hedge. So we all get into the car, and Dave turns the key, and the engine won't start. And these 4 or 5 scary-looking men, young men, just come around the hedge and, stampeding toward the car. And we're going, Dave, start the car, start the car. And it's not starting, and just like in a bad movie, when they're about 15 feet away, the engine starts, and they did a white turn really quick when we got out of there, because these guys were like trying to leap onto the back of the car. And I just like that story because, Dave was just such a nice guy to be kind to this befuddled, drug-addled young woman. And, we got her home safely, and you know, it was so clear, you know, even, this was probably before he launched the Rocketeer and made his name with the Betty Page stuff, but, you know, it was just clear that he was really gonna go far, even though he needed a better car.
He had the worst Mustang ever to come out of Detroit.
And he kept it for a long time.
Yeah.
But you're right, Dave was a real gentleman, always.
Anybody else?
Well, I'd like to say that I think Bill wouldn't mind saying this, but recently Bill Ray got in contact with me, well, a couple of years ago, and then when you talked to me, you decided that you'd contact a couple of other people as well. You want to talk about that, Bill?
I don't think I can tell the story without crying.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Well, well, anyway, I'm going to jump in here anyway. The nice thing about it is that Bill talked to me. We had our differences. We got over it, then we laughed and everything. And I said, "Well, that wasn't so hard, was it?" And he says, "Yeah, there was a couple other people on his list. One, which is Mr. Stout here, and then the other one was Dave Stevens." I said, "Well, why don't you call Dave up now?" And he goes, "Oh no, man." He said, "One a night is enough." And I think it took him a couple of weeks. But then the good thing is, he got back in contact with Bill here, and then reconnected with Dave, and Dave attended Bill Ray's last exhibit, which I got lost and didn't make it at all. Otherwise, that would have been the last time I would have seen Dave, and I'm sad I didn't. But they all had a good time. Foster was there, and now Bill's having another exhibit on Saturday. But it was very good for Bill to get reconnected, because I know these two guys fairly well, but I know Bill pretty well. And I know for Bill Ray it was very, very important to bridge these gaps again. And he was absolutely delighted that Dave did want to reconnect, and it worked out terrific. Because otherwise it would have been very, very sad for Bill Ray, as it was for a bunch of us that knew him. And I'm sorry I didn't call him, but you know, whenever we met, whenever we hooked up, we always had a good time because we were a couple of buggers. So anyway,
We
I just
were
wanted to say that.
estranged.
Not in the English term.
No, that's buggeroos. No. Yeah.
Go ahead.
To summarize it very quickly, we were estranged for 20 years. My fault, not his, but that's human nature. And when I did get back in contact with him, it was like not one day had passed, no recriminations. He was just fantastic. We had great lunches, and I went over to his house and saw all the work he was doing before the end. And as Paul said, he came to my show a few months before he passed. And I knew how sick he was, and he'd been sick that long, yet somehow at the show he just seemed like Dave with just a little bit of makeup on to cover the, you know. But he just didn't think he was going to go that fast all of a sudden. But I know he was fighting it for a long time.
Yeah, from the start, it was just about 10 years ago, when he was analyzed with the problem. And then I got him to UCLA to double check, and it was definite that he's got this problem, which will be eventually fatal. The attitude towards the work, the joy, the wit, the humor, like you can, these kind of stuff still went on from day one of that problem right to the last day we saw him. He's got this little grin on his face as we're living that. The most impressive moment for me was once when he came back from a chemo session. This was just about 2 years ago, he was an absolute mess. He looked like just death warmed over, and he sat down and did a portrait of himself in the same intensity and skill and talent. It's in one of the sketchbooks, and it's absolutely terrifying. But how he could do that is always, I just don't understand, because I didn't have those problems. But it's a kind of courage that was just a nature, part of his nature. And he also went to, started to learn to oil paint, went back to school after about, he was into this problem 5 years, and he went back to school to learn to oil paint, one of which is over there of the Black Dahlia. I would say it's the Black Dahlia, and he would correct me and tell me her real name, because that's who he made the portrait of, not of the girl that's in the newspapers, but the real actress. A potential, it's sort of a portrait of every girl that never made it in Hollywood. And he did simply because he didn't have the energy to do anything other than what he absolutely was fascinated and in love with. And that's what he did the last years. And of course, the oil paintings, he learned to oil paint so he wouldn't be so slow.
Well, he was dying to do more expressive work,
Yeah.
to actually have brushstrokes show, things like that.
and,
But it was very difficult for him to let go of that ability to render everything perfectly.
Yeah, and
But-
it still looks like still looks like a Stevens, even though it's an oil painting. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just astonished by that humility. Here's a guy who thousands of people would pay to have him teach them,
Yeah.
and he goes back to school.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to say one thing. At Hanna-Barbera, one time, he brought in some pages he was working on, and there was Mike. He went to Mike Sikowski, who he drew far better than, and asking Mike for his tips because he really respected Mike, and it was a real nice little thing for me to see. He was really cool about that. And the other thing I do want to say, working in the same room with him, because he'd be over my right shoulder in the corner. I mean, when he wanted to, that guy could draw fast.
Yeah.
I mean, he could draw fast. Because there was a few times I had quite a few problems. He goes, I said, well, fix it. And he would. He'd just go, bop, bop, bop.
Yeah.
And I went, like a mathematician. He just knew. I mean, he was really, really good like that. But sometimes he got in his own way. He figured it out. But on some jobs that Bill Ray and I worked on with him, we'd bang these silly drawings out, and Dave would just put that magic brush down and pull it all together. But that's when he could relax. But that guy could draw fast, as Stout would tell you.
I think, Bill, you mentioned how he liked to get on the phone with people, and that would eat up a lot of time. But I suspect that, I know that when I'm doing a drawing, I don't spend anywhere near the time that Dave did, but I spend a lot of time on research.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of love that part of it. And I get a sense that Dave did too. Probably the most fun part of the job was finding all the research elements.
Yeah, anything to avoid that work.
Yeah.
Well, he would surround himself.
Yeah.
He'd have like a whole book of Frank Frazetta, famous funny covers here, a whole bunch of stills of this over there, the reference of all the planes over here, or whatever it might be. And he might not even use all that stuff. But it was just like he kind of needed to immerse himself in it, take a long time setting it all up. And I remember more than once barging in the studio with just all this stuff around him, and him just kind of like, just being a little bit embarrassed, like he thought that I would think he was swiping, which I knew he wasn't. It was kind of the inspiration to stuff to get you rolling. So, yeah, the actual drawing I don't think was that hard for him, but the distractions.
Yeah, along the lines of what Mark said, Dave's passing has left a huge hole in my life and my heart. And but the one comfort I get is every time I think of Dave, I always picture him laughing with that twinkle in his eye.
A dash of Errol Flynn.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark.
Everyone's been talking about perfectionism. When we did some Rocketeer stories of Disney Adventures while Russ was doing the movie adaptation, and I have to be honest, I don't remember who the artist was for them. The Disney Adventures was a digest, so the panels were very tiny. And Dave happened to come into the office that day just by coincidence, and I was showing it to him. Remember, this is somebody else drawing it. He's in the middle of making the movie. He's one of the producers on the movie. His time was very limited. He looked at it and said, I gotta fix the costume. He took all the art, went to one of the art rooms, sat down and re-inked half the stuff to make it right. It wasn't even his stuff, but the Rocketeer had to be the Rocketeer. That's perfectionism.
Anybody else before we wrap up?
A little
Yeah.
bit of a mystery. For someone who, somebody mentioned Errol Flynn, and that's so true, but for someone who always looked so perfect and by my own judgment, I say the best dressed man in comics, can anyone explain the puffy shirt?
Because he loved Tyrone Power, he loved the swashbuckling movies and stuff like that. That's why he did. And actually, when we were lifting weights, because he did want to build himself up.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, we both tell him. I said, mate, you can't be eating salads all the time. You got to eat some meat. You know?
Steak.
Yeah,
Steak.
you gotta
Have a
eat-
hamburger.
Yeah.
And then we would go out
And he go on.
and we would be telling him this weeks on end. Meat, steak. Yeah. You want to get big, right? Look how skinny you are. You're ripped and everything, but you're skinny. He goes, yeah, I want to build up. And then we would work out for hours, and you got to eat right after you work out. You know, you got to eat a lot. Okay. We go to the like Jerry's Deli or wherever it might be, and he'd go, I'll have the tuna salad. What are you doing, Dave?
Yeah.
Come on.
We used to go to
It's
Phil's,
diet food.
we used to go to Phil's Diner and eat that steak sandwich. Phil
Right.
Everly owned this diner that we'd go to, and I said, eat that. You know, eat that.
When we would, well, when we knew problems were there, we used to discuss, you know, what I'm going to say at this kind of an event, and I promised that Dave, I'm going to remind him of the puffy shirt. No, don't. One of his mistakes, but he was a character.
Well, the shirt surfaced at was it
WonderCon.
WonderCon.
We actually rode up in the elevator together, and he was like, wait till you see this.
Yeah.
Look what I just got. And I'm like, oh.
Oh, he got whistles in the whole shot. It was that was fun.
Actually, the shirt I'm wearing tonight is in honor of Dave. This is my pirate shirt. I've got little Jolly Rogers there. And that's, I wore that for Dave.
Yeah.
Who? Oh, Phil. Phil, you had a question?
Dave Stevens' cubicle was right next to mine when I was at H&B back in the late 70s. And on the subject of beefing up Dave Stevens, he was thin as a rail back then. And during his lunch break, he would go to some store nearby and come back with a half gallon of Haagen-Dazs every day. And he had his own spoon with him. And I would see him working on Rocketeer sketches during the lunch break. And about the ice cream, I asked him, why are you doing this, Dave? And he said, well, I got to keep my strength up to finish this damn comic book. So I remember Dave just being on a diet of Haagen-Dazs almost every day for a couple of weeks. And I don't think he ever gained the weight. Not much.
He did get stronger though.
He was strong.
Well, I have a Dave Stevens story that I want to share before we close. And like I think everybody up here, I really regret that I didn't spend more time with Dave. I mean, it's like that with anybody. When they pass away, you just sort of regret all the missed opportunities, the times that you thought about calling but didn't. And I was going through a sketchbook that I bought from Dave. I think it was his first sketchbook, and he wrote an inscription that said, "Bill, let's dine at the Pig and Whistle, you'll love it." And it was an invitation from him to give him a call and go out and have dinner, and I just never got around to it, and it makes me sad. But there was one time, Dave used to like to go to the Derby on Los Feliz, which used to be a Brown Derby restaurant, and listen to a swing band. So one of the bands that he listened to was the band that Care sings with, more as modern rhythmists. And actually that's how Care got to know Dave. She ended up probably knowing him better than I did through that because Dave used to just go there and they would hang out after hours and have a drink and just talk. And but there was one night I was sitting there with Dave, listening to the band, and Dave leaned over and he was looking towards the bar, and he said, "You see that guy over there in the army jacket?" And this guy had like a little short Eisenhower jacket. He was all dressed up like, hair slicked back, like he was out of the service in 1944. And I said, "Yeah," and he says, "I call that guy the Sipper." And I said, "The Sipper? What do you mean? Why do you call him the Sipper?" And he said, "Just watch it. You'll see, just watch." And so I sat there and I watched this guy, and the guy would just sort of saunter around the bar, and he'd see a couple of people having a conversation and a drink left unattended. And the guy would just sort of move around, and he would look both ways to see if anybody was watching him, and he would carefully reach over and he'd grab that drink and just put it right back. And then move on. And he did that all night long, and that's how he would drink. He never paid for a drink, this guy. And I looked at Dave and I said, "When did you notice this?" And he said, "I see this guy all the time. I've been watching him for years." So that was Dave. He was a keen observer of life around him. And I think you can see that gleam in his eye, too. He took great joy in watching the Sipper do his thing. Okay, well, Scott Shaw proposed that we have a toast for Dave. I know we don't have proper drinks, but I think it's a good idea. So everybody grab whatever you have in front of you, and let's raise a toast to Dave. Scott, would you like to lead?
Here's to our departed friend Dave Stevens. May you always have clear skies for flying.
You are